A few months ago, I made a video talking about Data Design Interactive, and in that video, I made a brief discussion point about shovelware in gaming. And without me needing to repeat myself, if you've already seen the video, I was only scratching the surface when it came to shovelware, because one subgenre of shovelware that I left out in the video was licensed games. Now, the concept of licensed games is very easy to understand. It's basically games that are based off of properties of any medium you can think of. And just like DDI type of shovelware, licensed games were extremely infamous for their poor quality, with most of their problems pertaining to the fact that they were just rush jobs just meant to capitalize on a franchise without any effort whatsoever. Obviously, there were exceptions like Shrek 2, Simpsons Hit and Run, Spider-Man 2, fucking Chronicles of Riddick on the Xbox, what? Even with that small section of good licensed games, it just underweighs the mediocre and terrible. But I would be just a fool to throw my hands up in the air and say licensed games are terrible and just leave it at that. Because truth be told, licensed games have existed as long as shovelware has, dating back to around the Atari 2600. And for as long as up until the 8th generation of video games, licensed games were a very lucrative market. Didn't even matter if the game was shit or not. If it had a recognizable IP, it was bound to make a lot of money. But with me saying that licensed video games were a lucrative market, that meant there was some form of oversaturation within the game publishing space. And with oversaturation in a gaming space, there's always going to be those companies that either ride or die. And in today's video, we're going to be discussing a video game publishing company that died the hardest. And I know you already clicked on this video to know what kind of company I'm talking about, so now I have to finally answer the question. Who the hell is Brash Entertainment? On the surface, Brash just seemed like a THQ wannabe, just making shoddy license games with no effort put into them and then just shit them out to unsuspecting customers. But compared to THQ, Brash had some things that differentiated itself from the competition at the time. And how it differentiated itself from the competition was that it branded itself as a Hollywood video game publisher, basically having the ambition of transporting the licensed game development cycle into a Hollywood movie production cycle. And to strengthen that pride even further, Brash Entertainment was co-founded by Thomas Tull, who was the founder of Legendary Entertainment, which gave itself a clear advantage in the licensed game market as Thomas already had connections to the big studios in Hollywood. But even with that advantage by its side, Brash still crashed and burned very horribly, and this video is gonna tell you why. Okay guys, I'm gonna be real with you. If I titled this video like The Rise and Fall of Brash Entertainment, the rise part is actually kind of lying. I clickbaited you and I am very sorry for that, but just hear me out, okay? Hear me out. Usually when a video is on a company like this, obviously there's going to be some like rise and fall bit, even if I don't say it in the title. But talking about Brash Entertainment, it's all just a fall, okay? But there is only like one rise bit that I just want to like briefly mention before we get into like the actual fall bit. So when Brash first opened, it was done out of a $400 million investment by its 4 co-founders. And that's pretty much all you have to know. I'm just going to leave it at that because it's relevant in the later video. But now that I've explained all of it and got that out of the way, let's get into why Brash Entertainment fell hard. Brash Entertainment opened its doors in 2007 and was co-founded by 4 people. These people being Thomas Tull, Nicholas Longano, Bert Ellis, and Mitch Davis. Immediately after the company was set up, the co-founders started working on attaining the licenses from big studios. These studios included 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, Universal, and Lionsgate, with the company making big waves in that it was reportedly developing a game based on the Saw franchise and the movie 300. Despite that remarkable achievement in a short amount of time, there was just one problem, and that was 20th Century Fox. You see, when Brash made a deal with 20th Century Fox, they thought that they would make games based off of movies like Night at the Museum. However, while it was a possibility that they could, the only way they could get themselves on the license was if they published 3 games beforehand. These games being based off the 3 respective movies: Alvin and the Chipmunks, Jumper, and Space Chimps. And the problem especially reared its ugly head when Alvin and the Chipmunks was scheduled for December 2007. Keep in mind, this is around the halfway point of 2007. That meant that the game had to be rushed out quickly and cheaply as possible. Thankfully, Brash Entertainment was able to get a few developers on board for the 3 respective games. These developers being Sensory Sweet Studios for Alvin and the Chipmunks, Red Tribe Studio for both Jumper and Space Chimps, and also companies like Collision Studios and WayForward developing additional ports for both Jumper and Space Chimps. And thankfully for Brash, all these games were completed around the time that the movies came out. So with all that said and done, now Brash can finally focus on making that Night the Museum video game. But even with completing that task, there were still issues that reared its ugly head. All 3 games were critical and commercial failures. Alvin and the Chipmunks sold an estimated 360,000 copies, while Jumper and Space Chimps sold an estimated 119 units combined. In addition to that, all 3 games were criticized for their low quality. This in turn caused Brash's reputation to somewhat go down the drain, as many companies were wary of partnering up with them because of the low quality of the 3 games. But even with that, it didn't seem to harm Brash's reputation with Warner Bros., Universal, and Lionsgate. So now here is the question: what went wrong? Well, in the glorious year of 2008 for the company, everything. I've already mentioned how Jumper and Space Chimps sold poorly for the company, but that was only just the tip of the iceberg of the amount of problems Brash faced before it closed its doors. For starters, throughout 2008, almost all of the co-founders of Brash Entertainment left the company. The first was Nicholas Longano, who left the company in May 2008 after Jumper's failure. The second was Thomas Toe in October 2008, and the others, Brett and Mitch, left following Thomas's departure. And all of these departures were a sign that Brash was collapsing inwards. But what about that $400 million investment used to start the company? Well, how is that not keeping them afloat, you may ask? Well, that $400 million was debt, and Brash didn't even have access to most of it. And even with the money it did have, throughout its lifetime, Brash Entertainment lost well over $100 million. So with all the signs of a declining company, Brash Entertainment had to take extreme measures in order to stay afloat. One of these measures that Brash Entertainment took was that it would reduce its game schedule, with them modifying their 2009 schedule to only have 2 titles, Six Flags Fun Park and Saw the video game. Brash also did other things like firing a majority of its employees in November, and also was in talks with the license holders on returning their licenses. But even with all of that, Brash Entertainment officially closed its doors on November 14, 2008. All the licenses Brash acquired were returned back to their original owners, and the games that were in development with Brash Entertainment eventually were released under different companies. But even with the company dying a very short but painful death, there is still more to the story, and that is in the form of lawsuits. So when I was talking about the many things that Brash Entertainment did in order to stay afloat, one of the things I intentionally left out was that Brash was forced to stop paying its developers. And how this is relevant now is that after the company went under, it was sued by 2 of its developers, Zootfly and 7 Studios. 7 Studios was the studio behind Six Flags Fun Park for Brash Entertainment, while Zootfly were the developers behind a Prison Break game that would eventually be released under Deep Silver. In their respective lawsuits, 7 Studios and Zootfly claimed that Brash owed them around $1.3 million in unpaid work, with 7 Studios claiming $581,000 in unpaid work, with most of those unpaid work being linked to Six Flags Fun Park, with an additional money being linked to a game based off of the movie 9 which never came out, and Zootfly were claiming that they were owed around $748,000 for their work on Prison Break, which, by the way, after Brash Entertainment closed, Zootfly had to personally self-fund the game for 13 months. Only when it was at the tail end of its game development did Deep Silver gain the publishing rights. Despite all of that, however, I couldn't find any information relating to the outcome of these respective lawsuits. But we are still not yet done, because there was another lawsuit although this one was based off of Brash Entertainment instead of being directly suing Brash Entertainment. And this lawsuit was pertaining to a lawsuit made by Factor 5 Entertainment. For some context, Factor 5 and Brash Entertainment entered into a development deal around March 2008, and the company was working on a very big project for Brash, a game based off of Superman, scheduled to be released in 2010. However, due to Brash's financial troubles, that meant that Brash had to stop paying Factor 5 for their work. And when Brash Entertainment eventually closed its doors, this put a huge financial strain on Factor 5, eventually leading to the company to close its doors in May 2009. But just a month after Factor 5 closed, the company was sued by ex-employees, who not only were claiming $900,000 in unpaid wages, but also alleged that the founders of Factor 5, when the company was filing for bankruptcy, transferred all of its assets to a different company known as Blue Harvest, now known as White Harvest at the time of the lawsuit, with a lot of the assets being claimed to be from a remake of Star Wars Rogue Squadron being developed for the Wii. Despite that, however, nothing in the lawsuit ever mentions anything about Superman or Brash Entertainment. And once again, just like the other two lawsuits, I do not know the outcome. And so, with all those lawsuits coming and go, we finally close the book on Brash Entertainment's very short life. So to conclude this video, I wanted to provide some reasons as to why Brash Entertainment ended up the way it did. 2 weeks after Brash closed its doors, Variety published an article called Brash Fallout: A Cautionary Tale, in which it provided insider reasons as to why the company fell flat. Not only was the Fox deal that I mentioned previously in the video listed as one of the reasons, but the article also mentions reasons like a poor grasp of experience within the video game industry by its co-founders, frequent conflicts and leadership vacuum throughout most of its lifetime, and also overly estimating Space Chimp's potential as a licensed video game. But one reason Variety gives as to why Brash Entertainment closed its doors so fast was because of the time the company was set up in. To give some understanding context, Brash Entertainment opened its doors in 2007. And what happened in between 2007 to 2008? That's right, a Great Recession. And added on to the already established fact that the $400 million investment was debt, all of this is to say that Brash Entertainment started as a company in the worst possible time. But even if it wasn't affected by the Great Recession or any financial crisis whatsoever, I'd only think that Brash Entertainment would have probably lasted like 10 years at best. Because another interesting detail about the year 2007 is the company THQ. I think everyone kinda has a gist on how THQ went bankrupt, you know. They were suffering from financial decline starting in the late 2000s to early 2010s, then they closed their doors in 2012, yada yada yada, you kinda get the point. But an interesting detail that I noticed between THQ and Brash Entertainment is the year 2007, because in that year 2007, that was when THQ reached its peak. And after that period started in 2008, that's when they started to go on a financial decline that eventually led to their bankruptcy. And just mind you, THQ was one of the biggest licensed game publishers of all time. So a company like Brash opening their doors right as THQ hits its peak, it really just shows you how Brash Entertainment just opened at the worst possible time to start a video game company. But even if they went against the odds and managed to publish all the games they were intending to publish before they closed, I don't think it would have really elevated the company in any meaningful way. Most of the games that were either linked to or published by Brash Entertainment only seem to have really mixed reviews at best and negative reviews at worst. And I think there could be an argument made about Brash's closure kind of affecting the games maybe, but even then I don't think the review scores would have really been that different. But that's just me, honestly. That's just me. But with all that being said, we have now reached the end of the video. And here are my final words. Brash Entertainment was a big old fuck up, but at least we got Alvin and the Chipmunks on the Wii. Now watch me speedrun this game.